welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day, where we're just going to be breaking down some of the biggest remaining questions in college football following week one. Again, not entirely over with, because we do still have Florida State versus Boston College tonight, but outside of that, all of the big results for college football week one are in the books, and I want to talk about some of the remaining questions and just mention Florida State. Is the ACC in trouble? This is a little bit of a make or break season for the ACC. Last year, having an undefeated conference champion miss the playoffs definitely rubbed some of the ACC programs the wrong way, mostly Florida State and their whole legal disputes with the conference during the offseason, but Florida State also didn't do themselves any favors with their week 0 loss, so we'll see what happens for them tonight against Boston College. But we've seen 3 of the top 4 contenders in the conference already lose. It was, like I mentioned, that Florida State lost to Georgia Tech, Clemson's lost to Georgia, and Virginia Tech losing to Vanderbilt. And again, these are 3 of the top 4 teams in the ACC preseason polls, and you're losing to, Clemson. Clemson, the issue is how they lost as well, and we're going to be diving a little bit more specifically into Clemson as well, but, them getting blown out, and then FSU and Virginia Tech both losing to inferior competition, that is not a good sign for the conference. I think it would be huge for them to be able to have 2 playoff teams. I talked about this headed into the season. I think the way that happens, the most realistic path for it, is that Florida State, who sort of had the most expectations coming into the season, if they have a very good year for themselves and end up losing to a team like Miami that I think is a true contender, ending up losing to a team like that in the conference championship. Now, Florida State still has a ton of time to rectify that Georgia Tech loss, but that is a brutal blow for them. Clemson, like I mentioned, it's not just that they lost, because Georgia at a neutral site, by the way, not sure how Atlanta is neutral site for the Georgia Bulldogs, but I digress there. But them losing in horrific fashion, and also, for whatever it's worth as well, them losing with their offense not really showing up for them, which was more so the question with Clemson headed into the season. So the ACC seeming to be in trouble. Miami doing their best job to sort of put the conference on their backs, but this was a very rough start for the ACC, and I think it's going to be really hard for them to overcome, which sort of, again, all of this leading into the idea of, is the ACC in trouble? In order to fully answer that question, I think you have to ask, what kind of a program is Clemson going to be moving forward? Where this is a program that has been gradually losing their ground over these past handful of years. They were a juggernaut towards the end of the 2010s, and since then have really struggled to regain their footing post Trevor Lawrence. And Cade Klubnik was, well, even before that, it was DJ Uiagalelei. He never worked out for them. Cade Klubnik showed a little bit of flash leading into the starting job, but he is yet to sort of meet the expectations that were bestowed upon him. And Clemson, again, the fact that there is this massive sort of storyline hovering around them about the lack of using the transfer portal, it hurts, because you then see players like Torian Pride Jr. going and making an impact with Missouri in week 1, and you see Bo Collins emerging a little bit for Notre Dame. So they're just losing out on their players. Meanwhile, they're not actually bringing anybody back. 0 transfers on their roster this season. The only non-service-based FBS school to have 0 transfers. And that's something that again, it becomes a pretty heated debate as to whether or not, I think most people would say at this point that Clemson needs to pick up the pace in terms of that aspect of the game. Is Dabo Swinney willing to dive into that as well? Is he okay with sort of abandoning tradition? And not to say that Clemson's put in no effort, it just hasn't really worked out for them in the transfer portal up to this point. And it seems like there needs to be a more extreme emphasis on it. Now, as for Clemson with this game, I don't think that I'm going to entirely rule them out for the season just yet. That this was a very difficult week 1 matchup. I have a hard time sometimes. I can be a little bit fluid with it, but if you're scheduling really difficult opponents early on in the season, especially week 1, I will tend to give you a little bit more of the benefit of the doubt because we know that the teams that we saw this past weekend will not be the same versions of the team that we see at the end of the season. So I can give Clemson a little bit of wiggle room there. But again, didn't answer any of our questions offensively. And to be honest, again, I don't like ruling out teams early, but I wasn't high on Clemson going into the season. This is a disaster, feels like an exaggeration again, especially because they played Georgia, but this was a concerning loss. Now, to what degree, that's up to you. Let us know what your thoughts are in the comment section. But I do think that the ACC is in a fair, shape of trouble here because that we also saw UNC lose their quarterback, Max Johnson, for the entire season following the injury in Thursday night's game. SMU wasn't exactly impressive in week 0 against Nevada. So you're talking about a conference that the hope, in order to just retain your premier programs, was try and get 2 teams into the playoffs, and feels like it's going to be an uphill battle for that to be the case. Very quickly here, I'll talk about was Saturday night's game against Notre Dame and Texas A&M more about the bad offense or good defense? We did talk about this a little bit at length earlier on in the show. So if you're watching us on YouTube right now and you missed that, definitely be sure to check out that video. But I think that ultimately I have more confidence in the upside of Notre Dame's defense. These are 2 very impressive defenses between Notre Dame and Texas A&M. I think that this was a tougher matchup for Notre Dame in terms of having an inexperienced offensive line going into a rowdy situation at College Station, visiting Texas A&M against that defense. I just feel like eventually they're going to be able to grow a little bit more cohesion on that offensive line. The big thing for Notre Dame is, can they add a passing game, on top of what should be a very good rushing attack that I'm confident in moving forward this season. So I think that Notre Dame is going to, be okay. But Texas A&M, I have more concerns with. They have a new offensive coordinator in Colin Klein. They have a new, head coach more on the defensive side, of course, with Mike Elko. That a lot of turnover from last season to this. But I'll say this, I don't know how much easier things are going to get for A&M. They won't have to face Notre Dame every week, but they were sort of the ones that were supposed to have a little bit more of an upper hand, I feel like, in this game. And ultimately, the offense just never came through for them. Connor Wegman looked pretty poor throughout the night. And somebody that we already said it multiple times on this show. If you have stock in him, then good for you. Wegman was not buying over anybody with that performance, and he has a whole lot more to prove before, we can really start putting him in the conversation of some of these other young star quarterbacks that we're seeing emerging in college football. So we'll see there. I want to talk about Michigan as well. What is the answer for them moving forward at the quarterback position? Because they decided to almost, I don't know how last minute it was, or at least to the media, they didn't really let it out all that much, that they are moving forward with Davis Warren as the starting quarterback for the team, as opposed to Alex Orji, which I think generally speaking, like, I can understand because Warren does provide a lot more is maybe a bit of a hyperbole there, but he provides more passing upside than Alex Orji does 100%. Orji, it kind of seemed like, just based off of the fact that he has actually gotten snaps with this Michigan team before, that he's been here for a bit, that was going to, sort of help win him the job, but guess he didn't make the progressions that he needed to. That being said, Davis Warren, 15 of 25, 118 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. This was not in a very impressive offensive performance from Michigan. Now, new quarterback, new head coach, new offensive coordinator, entirely new offensive line. You lose your top 2 receivers as well. There are a lot of new things in this offense that definitely, make a difference in regards to it's going to take some time to piece this whole thing together for Michigan. That's why they were ranked, below a Penn State in the preseason poll. And I don't hear too many people in the media screaming for, Michigan is severely underrated. They have a whole lot to prove before we can get there. Davis Warren, is he the answer? I'm not sold on it. But that being said, we got 2 pass attempts from Orji. One of them, a little play-action rollout where he hits a wide-open man. And then the other one being him throwing it 6 feet into the dirt, 6 feet in front of the intended receiver. Like, he was off by a lot. So, I don't know if maybe we are going to see Alex Orji take on a bigger role this year. I mean, he got his fair share of snaps, I suppose, that he's going to provide different looks. Michigan hasn't shied away from a 2-quarterback approach in years past, but I don't know if they necessarily have the answer currently on the staff. And that being said, it's not just them. Like I mentioned, the receivers were pretty non-existent in this game, outside of tight end Colston Loveland, who is, going to be, especially given his surrounding circumstances this year, could work his way into being a first-round tight end in the 2025 NFL draft, but they're going to need production outside of him because Loveland, 8 catches, 87 yards, and a touchdown. That is half of the completions. It is over half of the total yards from Michigan receiving core, 121 yards, and obviously one of those touchdowns. So ultimately, I mean, we'll have to see. I think the Michigan is, again, a little bit more of a long-term product at this point, now under Sharon Moore, having so much turnover to overcome. But let me know what your thoughts are in terms of that quarterback position. Do they stick it out with Warner, or do you think that Orji should get a bigger chance? But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content, and we will be back tomorrow afternoon at 2:00 p.m. Eastern. We will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go